What's up, big YouTube? Excalibur here. In today's video, we're going to be discussing about ExcaliburUmbra's epic build. And boy, I got plenty of builds to show you. Otherwise. But otherwise, let's just get started right now. Epic YouTube, Excalibur from the future. Listen, Excalibur got a list of individuals who are not subscribed to the YouTube channel. You should subscribe. If you want to become the most epic person in the planet, you should subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you're missing out. Now back to the video. Alright, so let's go over with Excalibur's passive. And now the Excalibur passive is nothing too grandiose. Is that passive ability is that Umbra exhibits sentience in combat without transference control, attacks 10% faster, and deals 10% more damage while wielding with swords. Unfortunately, it is barely noticeable. Hot take: it should be 20%. Maybe it will be more noticeable if it was 20%, or for both its attack speed and damage if you're wielding like swords. So I would say 20% is more accurate than just having 10%, because 10% is really not that grand. However, I would recommend just use whatever melee you want. Just ignore the passive. If the only difference is Umbra gets to attack alongside with you while out of transference. As we all know, /dash. Yes, it will now with the Exalted Blade out, it will inflict with slash status chance. Radio Howl, pretty much the same thing as Radio Blind, but it silenced sentience as well. And Radio Javelin, which is why we're going to be using this. We're going to be using Furious Javelin, which means it will increase our melee damage and duration. And depending on our ability, strength, and duration, we will have it for like 24, almost 25 seconds, which is actually really good to have. And finally, the iconic, my favorite part of it is Exalted Blade. Now with chromatic blade, it will transfer our Exalted Blade into an elemental depending on our color of the evasive. For example, my evasive is red on the first part, so it will always go fire regardless. But if you wanted to change to evasive to blue, to electric, go for blue and purple. Instead. So this is basically my regular Excalibur. If I'm not going like Wrathful Advance, just your basic, then this is pretty much your basic build of the Excalibur that I would use. But not necessarily true if we're going regular. Because Excalibur is a beast when you build him right, with good builds around. But the arcanes for the regular, or even the ultimate, or even the first one, the arcanes that I recommend is Arcane Fury and Arcane Strike, which means Strike gives us 60% attack speed for melee weapons for 18 seconds, while every time we land a critical hit, we get 180 melee damage. Melee damage. But for now, this is just only the regular build if it's your first time using Excalibur, or you can always go prime continuity if it's pretty much your first time using Excalibur as a new person who just picked up Excalibur Umbra. Okay, you might thinking, what's Excalibur? What Excalibur should I really assume for my Archon shards? I'm going full Talforge Violet Archon shard, and they're pretty much all the same. If you don't know, the Talforge Violet Archon shard, it gives you 37% melee damage critical damage critical. When the energy is over 500, the damage boost is doubled. So be sure you combine Top Forge Red and Top Forge Blue, and it will become Violet, and then you'll be able to have the Top Forge Violet Archon shards. So let's get back into it. And if you wanted to say what is the best evasive for Excalibur, for me, I always like to go fire. But if you're going for melee stuff like melee influence, then it's gonna be blue, purple. That's electric, or if you have equipped with nothing going on, if you want to do toxin damage, then the green it is. Alright, let's begin the subsuming recommendation. And normally, if you want to, it depends on your choice. I would recommend getting rid of either the radial blind or the slash dash. Now, the first that you might be thinking is Warcry, which yes, recently Valkyrie lets out a cry that boosts his armor and attacks free for allies when in infinity range. Does this make now the question, it does have an augment mod name. It does have a view augment with which is Eternal War, which while active for Warcry, a duration is increased by 2 for each melee kills. Now, does it make room for stuff like Arcane Reaper? Yes. And Arcane Fury? Yes. And less likely to use Arcane Strike? Yes, but here's a problem with that. I find using Valkyrie Warcry, you kind of lack versatility, to be honest. And because let's just be honest, it will just be all depending on your Archon shards, which the vast majority of time, Umbra to me is better off with one subsuming ability that we are going to be recommending to use, and it'll be stuff like duration, armor, and then especially when you have prime flow, which is less likely for us to rely on, Tau Forge Blue, have max energy on our slots, and have armor. Like if we're going to survive more in the battle, and thanks to the Umbra mods, I would say 882 armor is not bad. It's not bad, especially thanks to the armor. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary to have Warcry, in my opinion. In my opinion, Excalibur's armor is good enough, and besides, if I want to make room for having Warcry to be equipped, I would use either regular Excalibur, or if we're getting Prime Excalibur from the old piece, then maybe it will be the case. But for now, Warcry isn't the best. It just isn't the best with Excalibur. It's only best when you're using Excalibur, or for those who are lucky, Prime Excalibur, in my opinion. And the next up is Nourish, but I will tell you what else is the best. Like Gloom is also not bad. Slowing down enemy movements while you're taking away their life force is really good for Excalibur. Evade is also good if you wanted to run invincibility, especially when you're getting health kills in return and weak points. This also make room for arcane, for the arcane. While you're invincible, you also gain ability strength and critical hit damage by 3 times. So it's also good when you're running it. But most of the time, Nourish is also a great thing because that way we don't have to apply viral to our viral to our exalted blade. Nourish does the job for us, and but majority of the time, I would say Wrathful Advance. Trust me, Umbra would love to have Wrathful Advance. And it's because it gives you critical hit chance for your weapons. And to be minded, Umbra's Exalted Blade is not really like 100 over 100 critical. It's still like 55, even though it has Umbra pressure and Umbra sacrifice. Anyways, I would definitely recommend removing slash dash because it doesn't really help much, in my opinion. It's good for movement. It's good for movement, but it's not good. It's not good for like crowd controlling. But it's up to you. You can also remove radio howl, radio blind, or anything. And it's just not recommended to remove javelin or exalted blade. So the first build is all about doing heavy melee damage with high ability strength. So we're going to use Chromatic Blade, Furious Javelin, Blind Rage, Prime Flow, Archon Continuity, and the 3 Umbral mods. This leads us to have Arcane Fury, which on critical has 60% chance to have 180 in melee damage for our melee weapons for 18 seconds, and Arcane Strike. But you might ask, why Arcane Continuity? You have fire. You have fire on your weapon, right? Right? You have fire as your invasive ability, right? Well, think closely. This is one of my favorite builds on ExcaliburUmbra. And thanks to having Toxin, we have a chance to have apply corrosion to the effect, and with Molten Impact and Northwind, it will our blast damage goes through the roof of dealing. And then we could have blast damage on it, and then we have magnetic, and thanks to having magnetic rush, we get to have 20 plus. We get 20 plus on magnetic. No, we get 20 plus attack speed, 60 plus on magnetic. And since we have a high status, thanks to our ability strength, we will apply both Toxin, Magnetic Blast, and Corrosion all on the forcing column. Which means it will lead less to stuff like melee exposure. And since we don't really have a good arcane, and for example, other than influence and exposure, and thanks to the introduction of magnetic rush, this makes room for melee vortex, which means it crowd control enemies. It will crowd control enemies and put up some damage. This also helps with Galvanized Elementalists, but since we have a high status, you can't just put melee Elementalists, but I do like Galvanized a bit more because we want to apply multiple status procs as best we can to give it a high damage. Keep in mind, magnetic is only good because of overguard enemies and overguard examine enemies, and you see, enemies just get pulled in. Think of it as a mini cell type, return to nothingness, pretty much. Okay, our next build is pretty much the Equilibrium. This is pretty much the same thing as the previous version, but unfortunately, the previous version has more ability strength with less efficiency, but Equilibrium focuses on health supplies, and gives us Archon Flow. And the reason why I pick Archon Flow is kind of funny for Equilibrium reasons. For Equilibrium reasons, the Arcane is still recommended as the same thing, the Arcane Fury and Arcane Strike. In Arcane Strike, the only difference is this one is more of a cold element. So if we have cold element on, we get to have melee exposure. For example, when we cast our abilities, it will cause melee exposure stacks up to 240%. This is the recommended build for the cold status if you want to absorb some energy for Equilibrium. Oh boy, you actually think you're ready for this. So melee influence. So if you want a complete melee influence build, this is the build for melee influence. But be sure you have magnetic rush to it because it's also anti overguard and anti Exemus enemies. And be sure you have melee influence because on electric status, 20% chance to apply melee status effect to apply enemies within 20 meters for 18 seconds. Cannot refresh while active. Yeah. So we're only gonna have a melee electricity, and also have, since we got magnetic rush, we also get 60 plus and plus attack speed with it, and with galvanize, with the usual with prime pure pressure, galvanized steel, melee elementalist, since we're not proccing multiple elements, and condition overload, shock and touch, voltic strike, and focus energy, magnetic rush.
You're done.
Okay, so the final showcase build that I will show you is that this is going to be for like harder endgame content for this one. So when enemies attack harder and they stop and they just KOs ExcaliburUmbra really fast. So this build is going to be a little bit different. This is about survivability, and we're going to take advantage of that due to the 3 Umbra mods. Get prime continuity, prime flow. Oh, and the rest of the other stuff is thinking. If you want to go offense and the same thing, yeah, sure, you can pretty much go chromatic blade, infurious javelin, adaptations. But if you want to stop lethal damage coming after you, you can go with like quick thinking. You can go quick thinking. If you wanted to absorb the damage and have pretty much gain energy, convert 45% of the damage on health to energy without shields, then yes, you can put on Hunter Adrenaline. So that way it can go to it can absorb the damage, making it easier to proc the Type Forge Violet Archon Shards, which means, yes, you will have an easier time of using Wrathful Advance, where it normally costs 25 energy, and only have to worry about pretty much 3 abilities other than Javelin. But either way, Hunter Adrenaline, if you want to completely, stop in the damage, this leaves room to such like This leads room to such as, well, we get to have combat discipline. You pretty much lose 10 health on kill, but squad mates gain 20 health on kill. Which means this makes some room for Arcane Reaper, which means on melee kill, 24 health regen and 666 armor for 10 seconds. While the Arcane Grace for on health damage, 9% chance for 6 health regeneration for 9 seconds. 9 seconds. And yes, and you might say, why? Your attack speed might be slow. This is where the speed of Alzaltai, and yes, melee influence comes in. And sure, the damage is really low, but it doesn't matter when we have the augment mods and we got Wrathful Advance. Advance, personally, it have Berserker Fury, Quickening, it also boosts combo count, Magnetic Rush, Healing Return, have Healing Return, it recovers 11 health per status types affecting the target. Condition Overload, Galvanized Elementalist, it's Galvanized Steel and Pressure with melee influence. Now we're gonna pick Warrior's Rest because it will let Excalibur survive. Or, I hate to say this, if you hate being knocked down, this is why I said Galvanized Elementalist for a reason, is Prime Surefooted. Look, I said it for the first time in the video. Yes, I said it. But overall, I do need an overmod for the build of tank, so that way you're not knocked down and lose. As much as I like Prime Surefooted, you do lose out on ability strength, which means it will be less. Which means it will be 15% less. Then it will be less likely to proc electricity and magnetic, which is why Galvanized Elementalist is very good. Is very good with Excalibur. Is all about to survive, not about the damage. Now, if we're talking about recommended weapons, it really doesn't matter in my opinion. Use whatever weapons you want, but if you do want to know, I used the Sturm Prime. Sturm Prime, which is the evolution incarnate, which is the incarnate form, it basically increases the base damage by 2 on firing, base for +5 multi-shot, stacks up to 5 times, 30 plus projectile speed, and increase base status by 11.3 projectiles, increase base status by 136 for the incarnate form. For the incarnate form, which most of the time you're gonna inflict not just blast, but viral, but most likely viral, and at least some heat. This is the build for my multi-shot. Yes, my multi-shot is 50.2, but that's just not it. When you have stuff like prime point blank range, prime point blank, blaze, galvanized Slav, which is 80% status chance on kill, the Stren Prime, not the Stren Riven mod, which also gives us 148.1 multi-shots, as well as with boosting the cold and toxin, slightly increased faction damage to Grenier, Vigilant Armaments, Galvanized Hell, which on kill it gives us more multi-shots, Vicious Spread, Prime Chilling, and plus Shotgun Vendetta, which also gives out a massive 180 multi-shot and 75 reload speed with galvanized acceleration. And for my secondary, I always love Epitaph Prime. Is one of my favorite. Is one of my personal favorites in the game. You want to go for second if you just want to focus on critical hit. Secondary Deadhead is one thing in conjunction voltage, but what you most likely want is secondary encumber, which means on random on status chance has a chance to trigger a second random status approx. The melee one really doesn't matter, so pick your point. Pick your point. Personally, I like the Skajati, so it's nothing much change. Now imagine this one is in Karnan form. Now what you're gonna need for Excalibur is Naramon, because a power spike, which means a melee combo, now decays while out of combat by 5 every few seconds instead of depleting it completely. With levitation, lethal levitation, killer rush, sling stun, mind step, false sling, amp spike, opening slam, and affinity spike. Now, last but not least, is if you want a recommendation, for pets, it really depends. But the Helios is really good. Helios Prime really good. Is Prime, the Shade Prime. But I would say most of the time I really like Vaska Kavats, because Vaska Kavats is one thing. Is one thing that they do is because they overall goes on a massive spree. They go on a massive stratus spree when there's enemies around. These are the recommended claws, like bite, maul, precision conditional, or burning claws, weak of the colt, swipe, magnetic claw, and redon claws. And plus, if your critical hit is over 50, you gain 1.2 final critical damage multiplier. And that would be it for the video. I hope you guys enjoy something. If you got anything else, in the comments, let me know in the comments. What's your build for your Excalibur? Is it a tank build or pretty much melee influence? Let me guys know in the comments below. In other words, subscribe for more. Take care. Bye-bye. And stay epic.
PlayStation